What's up, guys? Welcome to the Fantasy Mafia podcast. Today we're going to be going over the running back rankings that we have. We ranked more than 30, but we're going to be doing 30 total. Today we're doing numbers 21 through 30, so this is the first set that we're doing here. We are joined here by one of our admins, Zach Myers, aka Apex. Zach, before we get into the meat and potatoes of the show, why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I played fantasy football for about 15 years now. I remember my first round pick in my first draft was Chris Johnson, the year that he ran for 2,000 yards. So I was pretty pumped about that, getting the number one guy that season. I've loved fantasy football ever since. I've run a couple different leagues myself, and I just love talking about football.
Do you remember what pick you had when you picked Chris Johnson?
Oh man, I think it was pretty late. I think it was maybe like 7 or 8 or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, it's back. I mean, back then, which isn't really too long ago, but still back then, it's like quarterbacks were the ones going real early and often. So,
Yeah, I actually started a week late. I kind of wanted to get into it, so I just joined an auto pick team, and I got Chris Johnson. So,
oh, it's pretty cool. And he worked out
yeah,
really well for you. All right.
it
So, as
did.
I said, today we are talking about the running backs. Our previous episodes, we've done the quarterbacks, so we're done with those. We're going to try to keep it a little bit shorter today by just narrowing it down to 10. But we have obviously one more person now, so we'll see where the time takes us. Before we get into the number, we're going to count backwards, so starting at 30. There's a couple running backs that aren't on the consensus list here. If you guys want to, I'll mention them if you guys want to say anything about them, why you think they didn't make the final list, or if you can remember, Jordan, off the top of your head, like if somebody had somebody really low where other people didn't, maybe that's why he didn't make it. But a couple guys we're looking at that aren't in our top 30. And I think this was how many people? Six people's rankings?
I think we ended up with 7.
Seven rankings. Okay, so a group of 7 guys doing their own individual rankings, and this is the overall. So Kerryon Johnson, Marlon Mack, J.K. Dobbins, Matt Breida, Cam Akers, James White, Darius Geis, Ronald Jones, and Damian Williams. Those guys are just made it out of the top 30. Those are basically like your 31 through 40 guys. Any of those names stick out to either of you guys?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a few for me. And I mean, once you get to this range, you're really starting to talk about your committee back. So, we'll have to see if any of them break through and take the lead dog role. But there's a few guys that I like to do that. Cam Akers, I think, has a good opportunity in LA. I wasn't overly impressed with Henderson or Malcolm Brown over the past few seasons for Brown, but I think Cam Akers is probably not going to start off starting, but I think given maybe half a season once he gets acclimated to Sean McVay's offense, I think that he's going to take the lead dog role. So he's going a little early for me in drafts right now, but if he starts to slip a little bit, he's the kind of guy that, just stash him for a while. You can't get discouraged. You don't want to drop him if he has a few crappy weeks to start off with, but I think he can really catch fire. A few other quick. I mean, I like a lot of these guys in this range. I think they provide a lot of value here. I mean, for me, I go so running back heavy. These are guys that are probably going to be my 4th and 5th running backs here.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you hit on any of them, I mean, this is league winning potential. One guy that's just kind of interesting to me. The other, I'll let Apex talk about the other ones, but James White is just an interesting name to me. Every year he seems to finish within the top 30 running backs, but he never, ever is drafted inside the top 30 running backs.
Yeah.
He's one of those guys. He's just not a sexy name. I mean, he's going to have a consistent number of catches. We'll see how he does with Cam Newton there this season. It's the same offense, though. I mean, it's still Josh McDaniels running the show. So I think James White is, we always talk about we don't know what's going to happen with the Patriots backfield, but if there's one thing that we do know, it's James White is going to be involved in some capacity. So if you can grab him later in a draft as your 5th running back, I think that's great value there.
Yeah, the one that sticks out to me is Ronald Jones. I like him. A lot of people seem to be kind of down on him because of the Bucks drafting Keyshawn Vaughn, but I still see Ronald Jones as their first and second down back, and most likely the goal line guy. And so he's not much of the receiving threat, but if they can be in some positive game scripts with Brady now and not turning the ball over as they did a lot last year, I see Ronald Jones could be a nice flex player for you, and he's mid 30s for us, so that's a pretty nice spot for him.
Yeah, and quickly too, building off of that, is he has that reputation for not being a pass catching threat, and I mean he's not as big of a threat as other people, but he still had 31 receptions last year, so I think that kind of goes under the radar. I mean, he had over 1,000 yards last year as well, so people, talk about Ronald Jones like he hasn't done anything, but he actually had a pretty solid season in a pretty inconsistent, or I mean, it was a pass-heavy offense, so he didn't have a lot of rushing attempts.
Yeah, very true. Last guy I like out of our top 30 here, I like Dobbins. Probably the same kind of situation as Akers. He's probably going to be the number 2 most of the year, but for the future 2021, if you're in like a dynasty league or something like that, I really like J.K. Dobbins. I think he could take over as the lead guy if Ingram were to leave after this season. So he's a nice one to kind of keep your eye on.
You guys both hit some excellent points. Dobbins, you said exactly what I wanted to say, Zach. Dobbins, he's more of a dynasty type guy. He might get some work towards the end of the season, but I mean the Ravens are pretty much, they're going to be in it all year. I mean, even competing for the number 1 seed in the AFC. So Dobbins is going to get some work, but it's mostly going to be Lamar Jackson, Mark Ingram out of the backfield there, and then Kerryon Johnson is another one that we haven't brought up yet. His counterpart, DeAndre Swift, is going to be talked about today, so we'll get into that in a little bit. And Darius Geis, obviously, all of these guys have the potential to be the number 1 on their team. Either they have been the number 1 in the past, or they don't have a lot of competition around them, or they're in like committees. But Matt Breida, we're going to talk about his counterpart in a couple picks here. I already mentioned Kerryon and his counterpart. Marlon Mack, they got the rookie Jonathan Taylor there. I don't think he makes this episode. He's going to be in next week's episode, spoiler alert. And then James White, as you mentioned, he's consistently a top 30 running back, like you said, but he's one of the better pass catching running backs out of the backfield. And he is, they have Cam Newton there now. He's not really a check down quarterback. He does have a big, strong arm. He does tend to take away some attempts inside the red zone, but that's not really where James White does a lot of his damage. He does his damage outside the 20, catching those balls and getting you the yardage in the PPR reception. So good names here, but there's definitely a case for why they didn't make the top 30, which is what we're going to get into now. So kicking us off here is Philip Lindsay. He is coming in at number 30. He now has some more competition in the backfield with him, who we are going to be touching on today too. But let's get our thoughts on Philip Lindsay this year, and why did he come in a little later than what he's finished the past 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, you already mentioned it. So obviously Melvin Gordon's there. I'm one of the biggest Melvin Gordon haters on the entire planet. So the thing with Philip Lindsay, so last season he averaged the 26th most points per game. So, I mean, number 1, he didn't perform quite as well as you would have thought. And a lot of people assume with Melvin Gordon there, he's going to take over a pass catching role. But the reality is that Melvin Gordon is actually a better pass catcher than Philip Lindsay. So I can't see Philip Lindsay taking on, and I think we're all just looking, it's recency bias. We're looking at last season and we see, Austin Eckler had 90 catches with Melvin Gordon. Well, Philip Lindsay is not Austin Eckler. I mean, that's the reality. We just assume that's the role he's going to take over. This is a different team. This is a different offense. Philip Lindsay actually had 7 drops last season, which was number 1 among all running backs. So we have this assumption he's a strong pass catcher, but I think that assumption's kind of wrong. He had 35 receptions the past 2 seasons, which is solid, but that was with him being the league dog. I mean, they had Royce Freeman there, but Royce Freeman's really disappointed. So I actually don't think Philip Lindsay is going to have as big of a pass catching role as people think. So at this range, you're starting to throw darts at players that could take over a role. But among all these players, I think he's one of the lowest on my totem pole to take over that lead dog role because Melvin Gordon is much better.
All right, Apex, your thoughts on Lindsay here?
Doc kind of hit on most of my thoughts. I agree with it. I feel some of the ones that we talked about, before number 30 here, I would probably rather have over Lindsay. I just feel Melvin Gordon coming in, he's probably the better talent. So, say what you want about his consistency and total numbers over the last several seasons, but talent wise, he can definitely handle the load. He can handle that 250 plus carry range. So if you give a lot of the work to Gordon, I just don't think that there's going to be a lot left over for Lindsey. You probably would have Gordon or Royce Freeman be in the goal line back or short yardage, and as the doc said, Lindsey's kind of penciled in as this receiving kind of threat, but it just hasn't come to fruition as people think over the past 2 years that he's been in the league. So it's tough to see what kind of workload Lindsey's going to have, and to warrant this top 30 ranking and the ADP that comes with it. So it'll be interesting. I just don't feel like he's one I'd be investing in.
I mean, he's definitely the definition of consistency, but it's going to go down this year with Gordon being there. Between his first and second year in the league, obviously the undrafted rookie, he's only missed one game. He's started every game last year, but he's only missed one game out of 32 total. And then he's 26-yard difference between rushing yards in the 2 years. And then he's had 47 targets in 2018, 48 in 2019, and caught 35 balls in both the years. It's like you're basically like looking into it's copy and pasting the stats almost. But yeah, I mean, he's definitely going to take a hit, especially with Melvin Gordon there, especially with them even going out and getting Jerry Jeudy in the draft, KJ Hamler in the draft. I mean, there's a lot of mouths to feed there in Denver, and hopefully they can put it all together and give us some good fantasy production across the board, and make Denver fans happy as a team. But Lindsey, I've never really had him on any of my teams in the tons that I've done over the past 2 years, and I'm probably not going to grab him this year. Number 29 is DeAndre Swift, our first rookie on the list here, going backwards, outside of the ones that are outside of the top 30. We mentioned that he has Kerryon Johnson there with him too. Swift, I think, is probably one of the highest, one of the better talented running backs that came out of the draft. He's me and you, Doc, when we did our draft episode, we were talking about it. He went. I think he went to not a team that we really thought he was gonna take a running back. The Detroit Lions. We figured that like somebody that could actually use a running back and need a running back would be a better fit there. But I don't know. I mean, I liked Swift in Dynasty. I don't know how much I like him this year. Kerryon. I hate bringing up the injury thing. He does have some injury issues, but at the same time, he's heading into the season right now healthy, as healthy as he can be. So we'll have to see how that plays out and where DeAndre Swift and Kerryon play out in that offense. But kick us off with DeAndre Swift here.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
Apex. You start. We'll go back and forth. I started the last one.
Well, I've kind of been, the non-rookie guy this season with the whole COVID thing, so I don't really want to bring up that. I'm glad we're talking about him ranked ahead of Kerryon. I just feel like he offers a little bit more upside than Kerryon. When I was doing my projections for them, I couldn't see who was going to have the higher involvement. So they're pretty even in rushing to me. I gave the slight edge to Swift just because they want to see what he can do, bring him in as a second round pick. I gave him more of the passing work. So Stafford out of the backfield, we've seen him use the running back pretty frequently with Theo Riddick, and Kerryon has had a good role in the passing game this last 2 years since he's been in the league. So I gave that work to Swift. I feel like he can be very explosive and make most of his damage as a rookie from the out of the backfield receiving. So I'll let you talk about the injury risks to Kerryon and how that's going to affect it. I usually like statting guys for the whole season, so I don't really predict a lot of injuries. So I have them pretty similar with the slight edge to Swift.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you that Swift has a ton more upside, and Jerry and I talked about this in our draft episode, but DeAndre Swift was my number one running back going into the draft, and I think he's a true 3-down back. I don't think I've quite seen that from Kerryon yet. I think that he's more of a 3rd-down kind of running back. But yeah, I mean, the injury concern, it is real. I don't love talking about injuries, but there's certain guys, when you start looking at medical reports and seeing what other orthopedic surgeons are saying, there starts to become a a trend for certain players and a serious risk. So Kirian, based on the few medical websites that I look at right now, had the second highest injury probability among all running backs in the NFL. So I mean that you do have to take that into consideration. For me personally, I think DeAndre Swift is much more talented than Kirian, and I always think that talent wins at the end of the day. And I believe that the Lions are changing their culture. But I've mentioned this before, but I think them drafting Swift, they want to be a little more balanced. Darrell Bevell is in his second year, I believe, now as their offensive coordinator. In his time with the Seahawks, we've seen very run-heavy teams, and he likes to be super balanced. So I think that's what you're going to see from the Lions offense. And I also believe that Matt Patricia is fighting for his job this year. I think if the Lions have a bad season, he's going to be fired. So if DeAndre Swift's the best running back on that roster, I can assure you that DeAndre Swift's going to win that job at some point. It's another situation. We've already mentioned it a few times in the few minutes we've been doing this episode. But rookies, with COVID, so much uncertainty, rookies normally take a little bit of time to get acclimated to the NFL game. And this year, we're probably going to see that on a whole new level. So DeAndre Swift, I love his talent. I hate where he's going right now. I see him consistently going in the 5th or 6th round. I mean, that's insanity. And you're talking about people taking him as their second running back. I mean, if he was guaranteed to have that job from day one, I mean, I would be all on board. But Kirian's going to be involved in some capacity. He's not completely void of talent. So you'll see Kirian on third downs. And I think over time, though, talent always wins.
All right, and Matt Stafford hopefully we know that he's back. Hopefully he's back for the whole year. That Lions offense can be very exciting. DeAndre Swift just adds to it. So I'm pretty excited about it. I can't wait to watch them play. Coming in at 28, we got Jordan Howard, who comes over from Chicago to Miami. He is, I think he was very underutilized in Miami. Not underutilized, but used the wrong way in Chicago, I meant. I brought this up on another pod or two before, but I remember just specific games where they'd be inside the 5 and Jordan Howard's on the sidelines and it's Tariq Cohen in the game, and it's like, I mean, Jordan Howard's the bigger body, he's the one that runs through the tackles. Why is your pass catching third down back in the backfield taking handoffs there? So hopefully they use him a little bit better in Miami. They do have Matt Breida there now too. They traded for him. I think it was the second day of the draft, and I'm thinking it's going to be more of a 50-50 split. But Jordan Howard, he has every opportunity to be the RB1 there in Miami. Jordan, why don't you kick us off with your name partner?
My name partner. Yeah, I mean, so first of all, he's not with Matt Nagy anymore, and you already spoke to this, but I think Matt Nagy is a coach who likes to get too cute, from what I like to say. I mean, just you have a great goal line back, put him in there and get a touchdown. You get too cute with putting these scat backs in there, but he's not there anymore. He's in Miami. It's going to be interesting to see how, and I've talked about this extensively in other episodes that we've done, but their offensive system is going to look a lot different under Chan Gailey this year. I mean, last season they had the least amount of rushing attempts. I doubt that's going to happen this year. They should be more competitive this year as well. They had a terrible game script for their running backs last year, but I really think that Jordan Howard's more of a goal line plotter kind of running back. I think he'll definitely lead the team in rushing touchdowns, but I'll mention Matt Breida here briefly. I think that in PPR leagues that Matt Breida is going to finish with more points than Jordan Howard, and that's a take that I don't think a lot of people have, but Matt Breida is pretty exclusively going to have that passing down work. And Chan Gailey runs a high-flying offense with lots of pass attempts. So in that offense, I think I prefer the running back who's going to get a majority of the passing game work. And we're going to have to kind of see how the game script impacts Jordan Howard this year. I'll be interested to see. That defense should be very much improved. They shouldn't be behind in games as much. So I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic to look for. But in PPR leagues, I actually think I trust Breida more.
Apex?
Yeah, that's a good point. I do agree with you. The Nagy just didn't use him well. I don't understand how, like you said, they're bringing in Cohen for these, short yardage situations when you have a guy that's, really talented in that area. As in regards to Howard, it's hard to say what his usage is going to be. I do believe he'll get the most rushing attempts, however many that may be in this offense with that, will tend to be a little bit more, towards the pass and using the aerial attack, as well as the game script of the games. Their defense is not what we consider, tops in the league. So they're going to be playing from behind a lot, you would think. So how's that going to affect Howard? It's hard to say. I do think he'll get the usage. I do actually think he'll get a little bit of the passing work. I don't think it's just going to all go to Breda. Breda hasn't necessarily been, a pass heavy, utilized in the passing game very heavy in San Francisco. So it'll be interesting to see how that share gets kind of taken up. There isn't a whole lot of options there in Miami. We have Devontae Parker, we have Mike Gesicki. So filling that number 3, is it another receiver like Wilson or Preston Williams, or is the running back gonna kind of have a prominent role there? So if Jordan Howard can finish with a little bit, 8 or so touchdowns, I think he could be a nice mid-round pick. He's going as the running back 36 in drafts in 12-team leagues. So, that's a pretty decent value if he's able to return some touchdown, for your team, as well as be utilized a little bit in the passing game.
Yeah, if you can get a team's RB1 at the as your RB3 or even a flex spot, that's good value there, especially a guy that they're going to use inside the 10, inside the 5 in goal line situations. So I definitely like Jordan Howard. I like where he's going, and I think you guys got a good ranking on him. Does Kalen Ballage or Patrick Laird scare any of you guys at all, or are they just, hey, Miami was terrible last year and they had really nothing else to work with?
I mean, Laird a little bit, just because I feel he showed he's able to, be kind of, a Rex Burkhead type of player, good in the run and the pass. So Laird just a little bit, but I don't think unless an injury were to happen, we're going to see too much, Patrick Laird this season.
Anything on that, Jordan, or you want me to move on?
No, I mean, they don't scare me. If anything, I would say Myles Gaskin scares me more than those two.
Now we're getting into backup running backs on backup running backs.
Oh, gosh.
Is Carlson here?
Carlson would be proud, yeah.
All right, going on to number 27 here. This is a really intriguing name. The Chiefs, or not the Chiefs, the Browns brought Kareem Hunt back on another 1-year deal. These are redraft rankings, and this is our consensus for redraft. But if you're in a keeper league, if you're in a dynasty league, Kareem Hunt, I mean, he's probably going to be up even higher than 27 because he had a chance to even this year find a new team, but the Browns threw some kind of tag on him or something like that. But next year he becomes a free agent again. If he does even what he did last year over 8 games, he's going to be a highly sought free agent, looking for a starting role somewhere. So Myers, we'll kick it off with you. What's your thoughts on Kareem Hunt this year?
Well, you touched on the dynasty aspect of this, and it was actually Doc that brought up the coaching change in Cleveland that really made me take a look at these guys. I bumped Chubb up in my rankings after what I found, how he played when Hunt came back, but both of them were very good. I even remember watching last year. Hunt just looked like the better player, and I guess he was more fresh coming in week 10, having not played, but he looked better. He looked quicker. He was very explosive. So I was very impressed and with how he came out after the suspension. Some guys kind of tend to get out of shape in that respect once they miss some time. But the fact that they kept him, they offered him another contract, is pretty telling. They want to get him involved in this offense. Whether it be give him some carries, and from game to game, or the most telling use for him was in the passing game, getting these receptions. We have in our doc here that he was on pace for 74 last year if he would have played the entire season. So definitely a good role for him. So if he's able to kind of repeat that production, he could probably be their third receiver outside of Beckham and Landry. So I like both of these backs. I think if you bring in an extra guy when you already have, workhorse like Chubb, it really says that they want to get him involved somehow.
Yep. Yeah, so last season, Kareem Hunt was 25th in points per game for the entire season. When he returned, though, for the last 8 weeks of the season, Nick Chubb was RB15, Kareem Hunt was RB17. So if you can get that RB17 value, I mean, he's going in a great spot right now. You're talking about a guy that's going running back anywhere in mocks that I do, 27 to 30, I'd say is a pretty reasonable range for him. I mean, you're getting great value. And yeah, I mean, I've talked about this offense pretty extensively, but coming in this year, Kevin Stefanski, and it's one of those things. I love Baker Mayfield, but I think this is going to be a run first team. That's what Stefanski did in Minnesota last year. And I wouldn't be surprised if you saw Cleveland finish top 5 in rush attempts. So Kareem Hunt's going to have a ton of opportunity. I think that he's probably going to be a top, I'd say a top 22 running back, so he's going to provide solid RB2 value. And if Chubb was to go down, I mean, that's a whole nother story. But I think he's going to provide pretty solid RB2 value, and he's going, as an RB3 to flex play right now. So I love his value. I love the offense that he's in. It's kind of interesting. I was reading an article where Kareem Hunt is potentially looking at an extension in Cleveland. I think that's kind of interesting because, I mean, he could be a starting running back on almost any team in the NFL. Not almost any team, but you know what I mean.
He's
a
still
good
young.
half of. He's still, I think he's only 23, 24. And a lot of people forget just because he got released and did something stupid, he didn't lose his talent over that time.
Mhm.
So, and that's what he showed coming back last year. He pretty much got thrown into games immediately and he still produced. So I like Kareem Hunt a ton at his value right now, and I expect him to do big things in that offense.
I think we could all agree that the Browns as a whole they disappointed last year. They have too much power on offense to not produce with Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb and Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry, and then the defense was kind of underwhelming too. But just like I thought last year, I think even this year he's signing these 1-year deals. I thought that they were just going to run him into the ground, just preserve Chubb and then let him fly away in the offseason, but that didn't happen. Obviously, they brought him back. So now I'm going to think it again. I mean, if they're in any kind of playoff position or trying to get that AFC North title or battling it out for a wild card, which, remember, they did add one more wild card spot this year, so another team is going to be getting into that 7th spot there. They might kind of preserve Chubb because he is the long-term guy, where Kareem Hunt, if he doesn't sign with the Browns, he's going to just be used and done, and they'll see what they can get out of him and continue on with their running backs back there. But going into 26, we got Raheem Mostert as this time of the recording, and then when this actually airs, he has asked for a trade. He is looking to get paid, but he does come in at 26 on a run-heavy offense, the San Francisco 49ers, who also, we already mentioned, Matt Breida. He is not there anymore. They still have Jerick McKinnon, and they still have Tevin Coleman. But Mostert seems to be the favorite to be the number one there. Hopefully he either gets what he wants as far as money goes, or he's in the lineup for him, because in San Francisco I think he could be very effective. But we'll start with you, Jordan, on this one.
Yeah, I mean, so I wanted to rank Mostert higher just because when you look at that offense, you're like, oh my gosh, they're one of the top teams in terms of rushing attempts. But, I mean, from what Kyle Shanahan showed in his offense is he wants to rotate backs around. I mean, that's the reality of what he wants to do. As much as maybe, I don't even think Mostert's the most talented running back on that team. I think Tevin Coleman's probably better, honestly. But, I mean, they have 4 running backs. Jeff Wilson's another guy that's there. He's more of a goal line guy, but he's going to take away some touches on the goal line. One of the big things for me, too, is I think Mostert's just a product of that system. I mean, their offensive line was very effective last year. When you look at all of his metrics, I mean, they were very efficient in run blocking. They were 6th overall. He was number 1 in true yards per carry, meaning that he was just very efficient with the carries that he did have. But overall, it still led to pretty underwhelming numbers. He was 30th overall in points per game. He had a solid season overall, but it was because he was consistent. He didn't have a ton of boom weeks. He was just more of a that offense is unpredictable. I mean, that's the kind of theme here. But I think that Mostert's a product of that system. And I mean, I'll say that if he goes to another team, I don't think you're ever going to hear from Mostert again. I think he's 100% a product of the 49ers system and what Kyle Shanahan's implemented.
He did have a boom week against the Packers in the playoffs.
I was going to talk about that. I think that's a great point. I really like Mostert if he's a Niner. It's just like the doc said, going anywhere else, we're just not going to, even more so, we're just not going to be sure of the kind of workload that he's going to get. But in San Francisco, with them rotating backs, they like to go with the hot hand. And, that was evidence with the championship game last year when he had nearly 300 yards and like 4 touchdowns. Or like, he was just a monster. He just could not stay out of the end zone. He was, just a very efficient the entire game. The game plan was just executed, fantastic. And, that's the kind of team that they want to be. We got into the playoffs and, Jimmy Garoppolo, started throwing the ball a lot less. They started using the run a lot more with Tevin Coleman as well as Mostert. And, I feel like if his carries were to go up this year, like I feel that they would, I feel like he would come in, as the perceived starter. So if his workload increases, he doesn't need to be the goal line back to be able to get the touchdowns, as we've seen. He doesn't need to be the number one guy to, be efficient, as we've seen. So, giving him that number one role, we've seen him produce without it. So I just feel like he would definitely, give him a boost to produce as the number one guy, as long as he is a Niner. So like I said, if, at the time of this recording, if he is traded, we just might not see the same kind of, workload as we're expecting here in San Francisco.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, it does depend on where he goes, but even just looking at it, there's not a lot of teams that are going to just insert him right into the starting position, and then B, that San Francisco team, they run a lot, and even last year he wasn't really effective all 16 games. It was more towards the end of the year where he came on, and then that Green Bay game was where everybody just kind of fell in love with him even more. But that is the last game that he well, not the last game he played against the Chiefs too, but that is one of the last 2 games that he played. So he is coming off of one of the better games out of all the running backs last year. So that's what people are going on into their drafts and thinking, okay, this is the RB1 in San Francisco. I'm going to take him. Number 25 here, we got David Montgomery out of Chicago. He was the RB1 last year for him for the most part. They still have Tariq Cohen there, who's more of the pass catching back. But this is now year 2 for Montgomery. They have new sheriff in town with Nick Foles if he ends up being the starter there. So we'll see what happens there with Montgomery. Mars, why don't you start us off with him?
Well, I still have to believe that Mitchell's going to be their guy. I just don't see, like, if he's going to be their future, there's no way they bring another guy in and not play, Trubisky. So if they want him to be the guy and want him to prove it, he has to start. So we're looking at a similar situation to last year, if that were to be the case. And this is Matt Nagy's handpicked guy. We talked about he had Jordan Howard, and it wasn't a great fit. Jordan Howard, leaves, and he picks David Montgomery. He trades up to get him. So, he puts a lot in the starting running back at Montgomery. And, to this point, I haven't been very high on him. I just don't feel like, he was pretty meh last year, as we heard his, nickname referred to. He had the volume, he had the usage, but he was just not capitalizing on it. He wasn't getting into the end zone. He started to pick it up later in the year, but overall it seemed like he was a bit slower and less agile than some other backs, but he was a little bit more powerful. So how that's going to translate this year, if he's going to get an increase in carries, he's got to be more efficient with them to be able to crack the top 25 production as we have him ranked here.
And as powerful as he is, they'll probably just take him out and put in Cohen on the goal line anyways. Jordan?
Now, Nagy probably has a lot to coach for this year as well. I mean, he's a guy that's going to be on the hot seat if they don't have a good season, in my opinion. He's one of those guys, I'm so on the fence about him. He's going to have volume, so he'll have some sort of value. He was running back 24 last season, so we have him right about in that range again. The thing that he really struggled with, and, he still broke tackles actually at a pretty decent rate last year. Coming in to the NFL, Pro Football Focus loved him. He was one of those guys where all the metrics were in his favor in terms of being elusive, running guys over. And I remember reading articles on Pro Football Focus where anybody that looks at stats loved David Montgomery, and then he had a very underwhelming rookie season, and we thought he was going to have all the opportunity in the world. But the thing that really killed him last season was that line is terrible. I mean, they're one of the worst offensive lines in all of football, and when you look at it, it's even worse than I thought, honestly. So when he touched the ball last season, this is crazy. He had the 57th highest run blocking efficiency, 57th. I mean, that's pitiful. So, I mean, he has all the talent in the world, but it's just a matter of can he get help from his offensive line. And one of the things, and my stepdad's a big Bears fan, I said, I don't know what they're doing because I've always said that you build your team from the offensive and defensive lines. And the Bears didn't do anything to address their offensive line. So I have no idea what they're doing. If I rattled off the starters on their offensive line, I mean, you would be confused and thinking I'm making up names. I could be making up names and you wouldn't even know, honestly. So, I mean, that's the biggest thing for me is I think that Montgomery has the talent, but that offensive line, I mean, I can't stress enough, is atrocious. So, and it hasn't improved. So I just can't see his efficiency getting better. And you know, it's unfortunate because, like I said, I really do think that he has the talent. I just don't have enough faith in that offensive line. And, you know, it doesn't matter. You can be the most talented running back in the world, but if you're getting hit before the ball's even in your hand, I mean, it's game, set, match.
Mm-hmm. And not just the offensive line. I think the Bears' offense as a whole is going to be bad.
Yep.
Their defense is still up there. Defense is probably still top 10, top 12. A defense that if you do draft them, you're going to be playing them most weeks. They do have some. Obviously, they're still in a division with Green Bay, and like we mentioned earlier, when we were talking about Swift, is Detroit has some weapons there too, and Minnesota still. Kirk Cousins does like to throw the ball a lot, and Dalvin Cook is there. But so they got. I mean, the Bears overall, it's gonna be a rough season for them. They could be in the Trevor Lawrence sweepstakes, but I don't know why they would when they're paying $17 million for Nick Foles and got to figure out what they want to do with Mitch Trubisky. Worst case scenario is maybe they could try Montgomery out at kicker because they could always use one of those. The next one we got here is he's about 24 spots too low. He should definitely be up higher on the list. I'm just kidding. It's Devin Singletary. Jordan, why don't you kick us off with him?
You don't want to talk about Devin Singletary? I feel like I'm stealing your thunder.
I'll just pick up the slack because there is a couple things that I do want to mention, but I'll let you guys start off, and then if you don't say the things that I want to say, I'll say them.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was all aboard the Devin Singletary train last year, and I'm a little disappointed they took Zach Moss, and I've kind of gone back and forth on this as we've gone through the offseason, because I think Devin Singletary is a lot more talented than Zach Moss. It's just a matter if they want to give the reins over to Devin Singletary. And when you look at it, it's kind of interesting. He averaged almost 70% of their snaps last year. So to me, they think that he can be a full-time three-down back. I mean, that's 10th in the NFL in terms of how often he was on the field. So, I mean, that's a bell cow back. So they showed that faith in him. You know, I think obviously Zach Moss is going to take all the touchdown opportunities, but that's not really Devin Singletary's game. You know, it's kind of interesting when I looked at his metrics. So the website that I look at, they compare him to similar running backs in their careers, and his comparison was Dion Lewis, which I was a little disappointed with. I'd like to think that he's a little more explosive than Dion Lewis, but Dion Lewis had some very solid seasons, and a lot of people forget about that. But yeah, I mean, besides that, he's very shifty, and when you look at his metrics, he had the third highest juke rate. The Bills are obviously very run-heavy, sixth most run attempts last year, and he was super efficient with those carries. So, I mean, when you look at it, he has all the talent in the world. It's just a matter of are they going to hand the reins off to him, or are they going to have I think this is more comparable in Austin Eckler, Melvin Gordon situation than Philip Lindsay and Melvin Gordon. I just think that Devin Singletary can be just as explosive as Eckler was last season. I don't think Zach Moss is as good as Melvin Gordon, but it's just a matter if he gets the volume. I like him in the spot just because if he does take that three-down role, I think he could be a top 12 guy. But I think you're seeing him at a discounted price right now just because we really don't know how that backfield's going to shake up.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree with you. I really like this spot. You said you liked it. I really like Devin Singletary this year, and it's a bit flopped from you. I wasn't very into him last season until he started to come back from that injury, and just game after game prove that he was involved and he was being used, and he was very efficient with the touches that he was given. So I really like Singletary. And his current ADP is somewhere in the fifth round. That's great. We talked about some of these other guys that maybe you can be good to get him later, but Devin Singletary is he's honestly your flex guy, your third running back that you're getting, and like you said, he could be top 12. He could be a number one guy, depending on the how efficient he is and how many touches that he does get. So I liken the situation for Singletary to Miles Sanders last year. He had Jordan Howard. Jordan Howard leaves to a new team, and the community thinks that Miles Sanders is a top 10 back. Very on point, and I feel like that's the same kind of situation with Singletary. And Singletary's down here at 24, so I really like the spot that he's at, as well as his ADP in the 5th round. And with Devin Singletary, you had Frank Gore kind of be the more run heavy guy, as well as a little bit more touchdown dependent than Singletary. So with Gore gone, I feel like Singletary can take advantage of that situation, have a little bit more chances to get a touchdown. And the Bills as a whole, they seem to be very improved. I like Josh Allen. He definitely improved from year 1 to year 2. And you mentioned the 6 highest rushing totals. I feel like they'll get a little bit more balance, but I feel that Singletary at this number 24 ranking is a really good value.
All right, so I guess it's my turn now. I won't add on too much because I don't really have a lot to say. But one thing that neither of you guys actually mentioned, you mentioned his name, Apex, but you didn't really mention anything about how he's going to come in, is Josh Allen. And he's going to be taking away some touchdown opportunity too. He's built like Cam Newton. His coach was with Cam Newton when he was in Carolina. They're kind of building the team kind of the same way. Even though McDermott was the defensive coach there, he's kind of building. I mean, even just by bringing in former Panthers players, that's kind of what he's doing. He's just building a team similar to the 2015 Panthers, where they were really good on defense, really good on offense. Cam Newton was an MVP type player, and they made it to the Super Bowl. Josh Allen, along with Zach Moss, they're both going to take away touchdowns from Devin Singletary. I, as a Bills fan, going into the draft, I knew I wanted a running back. I was excited when they picked a running back, and as just rooting for the team, that's what I wanted. But as a fantasy player, I absolutely hate it. I really don't like Singletary now because of it. He's not big at all. He's 5'7", 210 pounds or something. He's a short, like, scat back type. I mean, Deion Lewis is a perfect comparison to him. He's a short scat back type player. He's not necessarily injury prone, so I'm not going to say that. But I mean, there's a lot of bigger bodies that can take him down. And then when you get inside the 20, inside the red zone, he might be on the field, but you know that Allen's going to be looking to tuck it under, or Moss is going to be on the field to try to pound it in. So his touchdown potential definitely goes down. He's going to have to break it open to kind of get into the end zone. He will get a lot of the carries. So as long as he could turn those carries into some positive yards and maybe break a few long runs open, he'll be all right. But I personally, and number one, I really don't like picking Bills players to begin with. I'd rather just root for my team on Sundays and then play my fantasy games. But I'm probably not going to be having any shares of Singletary because of that. Coming in at 23, we have Mark Ingram, who is on that high-flying, one of the top rushing teams in Baltimore. He's there again. I don't know what his term was when he signed, but he's still there with Baltimore and Lamar Jackson and Gus Edwards, and they picked up J.K. Dobbins in the draft. So they're loaded back there in that backfield. This is one I'm really looking forward to because of all the talent that they have in the backfield, and because Lamar does take away a lot of rushing too. How he's up here at 23, I want to hear from both of you guys. I'm excited for this one. So Apex, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, well, I don't feel like he's hired because they brought in J.K. Dobbins. I feel like for what he did last year coming into Baltimore, he was pretty involved. Lamar is definitely going to take his rushing away a little bit, some of the touchdowns away, but he had over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns, I'm pretty sure, on the ground, and he had a pretty prominent role in the passing game as well. I just think back the Ram game they had on that. I believe it was either Monday night or Thursday night. It was a primetime game against the Rams, and ran up and down the field on the Rams. They just couldn't
Everybody
do
does
anything
that.
wrong.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, I'm sorry, Doc. I know that you're the Rams fan, but it's just that's what you kind of envision when you think about this team. They're very run heavy,
Mhm.
and so if that's the case, you want to have that running back, and Mark Ingram's still there. He's no reason to believe that he can't get 1,000 yards and get a healthy amount of touchdowns as well. I did mention earlier that I do like J.K. Dobbins. I like Dobbins for the future. I think Ingram could possibly be out after this year, and as far as Dobbins kind of getting up to speed and being able to get that usage and take it away from Ingram, I don't think we're going to see, him being heavily involved, Dobbins as that is until later in the season. So Ingram's going to be a pretty solid guy. I feel like, running back 2 here is kind of a good spot for him. He's going to have that touchdown upside, and the Ravens as a whole, just a prolific offense that gives you a lot of touchdown opportunity, as well as a lot of time of possession. So I feel like Mark Ingram maybe won't hit the same kind of stat plateaus as last year, but he could be a very solid back for you.
Yeah, and last season I think it was under the radar, even though Mark Ingram had a fantastic season. He had 15 total touchdowns. I mean, 15, that's significant. So one of the things, just on a side note that I thought was interesting, I mentioned the player comp for Devin Singletary. The one for Mark Ingram is Frank Gore, which I think is a little interesting. It feels like Mark Ingram's getting stronger with age. He's 30 now. I had the big season last year. He had the 10th most fantasy points per game, so very, very, very solid there. And really, his production is directly related to his efficiency and volume, and that's what this team's all about. And one of the things that I find kind of interesting is he only played on 49% of their snaps for the season. Now, that's not significant, and he was a top 10 back. I mean, it's very rare that you see that. That just speaks to the level of efficiency that he had. The team obviously was number 1 in rushing attempts. He made defenders miss. Their run blocking was very solid. So the question to me is, do we think that J.K. Dobbins is going to knock down Mark Ingram's 49% snap share? And I think the answer is no, actually. I really believe, and Jerry, you and I have talked about this before, but I wouldn't be surprised still if Gus Edwards is on his way out. I don't know if they would necessarily cut him. I think he still has value, and I'm sure somebody would trade for him. He'd be a very valuable backup running back, and we've seen some impressive games from Gus Edwards, and I'm not worried about Justice Hill. So I think J.K. Dobbins is actually going to step in and take away carries from Gus Edwards and Justice Hill and not Mark Ingram, because when you think about it, I mean, Mark Ingram's already playing less than 50% of the snaps. I can't see them lowering that by much more. Okay, we'll say he plays 45%, and instead of being a top 10 back, he's a top 15. Either way, I think he still provides great value in that spot. He's one of those guys, you want to talk about consistency. 10 of his 15 games last year, he was a top 20 running back. Those other 5 games where he wasn't, he was right on the border. He was like the 25th running back. So he's always on the border of being a consistent RB2, and that's what you're getting from him. Great offense, great efficiency, and people are just – I love J.K. Dobbins. He's the future of the Ravens backfield, but I think people are writing off Mark Ingram a little too quickly, in my opinion.
Well, we might as well just move right on to 22 because you said exactly what I wanted to say.
You're welcome.
I'll say it anyways. Every time we talk about the Ravens and their backfield, I always bring up the same thing. But the reality is, camp cuts and cutting down to the 53 happens. I mean, there might be an exception this year. I don't know what they're going to do with the rosters, if they're going to extend them or not. But if it is a normal roster where they cut down to 53, Gus Edwards and Mark Ingram, they're both, I mean, I wouldn't say realistic, but they are both at risk of being cut, one of them. So Mark Ingram, I say that because of his age, and Gus Edwards because of them bringing in J.K. Dobbins, and they drafted Justice Hill last year. So I mean, they're a run-heavy team, so they could go into the season with all 4 of them, and there's definitely no reason not to. But we see it all the time. I mean, just last year, Shady was cut from the Bills, and when it was down to get to the final 53. So. It's not like, I mean, just because his name is Mark Ingram and he has a Heisman and he was a very prolific runner last year doesn't mean that his job is automatically safe. So possibly we could see it. I would probably, if I were to put money on it, I would say Gus over any of the other 3. But we could also see it be Mark Ingram too. Going on to 22 is Jordan, your favorite running back I see, Melvin Gordon, coming over to the Denver Broncos. Now we talked about his counterpart, Philip Lindsay, a little earlier. So I think it's your turn to kick us off here with Melvin Gordon.
Sure, I would love to. So, I mean, I'll just start it off that I think that Melvin Gordon is very overrated in real life. I mean, there's a reason, and I've mentioned this before, that he didn't get a big contract. I mean, he thought he was worth all this money, and nobody wanted to give him this money because he's not an elite running back. People have him in this category being, oh, he's a top 10 back. I mean, he's not a top 10 back in terms of talent, and that's the reality, and that's why he didn't get a contract. But we're talking about fantasy. So in terms of fantasy production, I mean, I want to argue with it, but it's really, he makes it hard for me to. When you look at his last 3 years before last season, he was RB 7, 5, and 8. So, I mean, he was a consistent top 10 running back in PPR formats. And even last season, you know, not playing the whole year, he was 14th in points per game when he did play. He only played 12 games. He had 42 receptions. I already mentioned earlier, I think he's going to have the passing game work over Philip Lindsay because he's a better pass catcher. And I think it's quite possible that Philip Lindsay is not going to cut into his opportunities as much as we think, because I think Melvin Gordon is the better back over Philip Lindsay. He's going to dominate the red zone touches. He's a better receiver. So if you're looking at it from the Broncos angle, what reason do you have to have Philip Lindsay cut into Melvin Gordon's carries? He's better at almost every facet of the game over Philip Lindsay. So as much as I think he's overrated in real life, he's produced each and every season. And going as running back 22, I mean, this is a guy that's shown he's a consistent top 10 fantasy back. So there's no reason in that offense, you know, they have prolific pass catchers now, a very solid offensive line. There's no reason that he can't return to being a top 10 back and for fantasy production, even with Philip Lindsay there. So, you know, maybe Philip Lindsay eats into it a little bit and he's top 15 instead. But either way, going running back, we have him running back 22. That's about where I've seen him go in drafts. And, you know, I think it's actually decent value for him. I've gotten him a few times in the 4th or 5th round as my flex play. I've already mentioned I take a ton of running backs early, but if you get him as your flex, I mean, that's an incredible flex to have. And I do think he's going to produce there.
All right. Apex?
Yeah, I mean, this is just a kind of a situation that I'm avoiding a little bit, you know, because of the committee type of situation that it is. I just prefer some of these other backs that we're talking about, like the Singletary or the Ingram, you know, over this because, you know, Melvin Gordon comes in, you know, they give him the money, not as much as he wanted, but they give him the money to be a number one back for them, which is a little head scratching considering they had Philip Lindsay, who was pretty solid, you know, for them in his first 2 years, and he had a great rookie season. So, you know, Lindsay kind of came in and became a fan favorite quickly. So I just don't feel like, you know, because of that, I mean, the fan favorites doesn't necessarily translate to fantasy success, but, you know, when he was in there, he just was working hard and, you know, just all around was a great player for the team as well as for fantasy. So, you know, bringing Melvin Gordon in, you know, we have this kind of up in the air situation of how much is Melvin Gordon going to get? How much is, you know, Lindsay going to take from that? And, you know, the kind of thought process coming in, as you alluded to, Doc, was that Melvin Gordon is the one, and we're questioning how much Lindsay's going to take. But, you know, what if it's the opposite way? What if Lindsay comes out and plays very well, and, you know, here we have Melvin Gordon kind of reduced to like a complimentary role and basically have him switched. So it's, you know, for that reason, I'm just kind of going to be out on this backfield because it's, you know, the range of outcomes are very, you know, up and down. It could be Gordon, it could be Lindsay. And then you also have Royce Freeman there that, you know, I mentioned earlier might take more of the touchdowns away at the goal line because he's kind of built like that. So we have 3 really good running backs and not a clear path for either of them in any facet. So I'm probably out in this situation.
I've personally never been a fan of Melvin Gordon either. Not necessarily thinking, goddamn chair, not necessarily thinking that he's overrated, but I just don't. I don't know. I mean, he's just never really been on my radar to draft. There's always been a player that I like around him when it was my turn to pick that I took over Melvin Gordon. I couldn't even tell you a year that I've had Melvin Gordon on my team. Maybe in a couple best balls last year, but who knows? But it's going to be the same situation for me now. I've already mentioned it when we talked about Philip Lindsay that they have a lot of weapons there. Drew Lock, he is a pretty decent quarterback. I think he's going to be throwing it more. I mean, they might want to get the run game involved between Lindsay and Gordon, but they're not going to. They didn't draft Jerry Jeudy at 15 overall. They don't have Cortland Sutton. They didn't draft Noah Fant early last year for them to just hand the ball off. They're going to be throwing it. They're going to be throwing it all over the place. They need to throw it when they're up against the Chiefs, who they play twice a year. So, you got that. And speaking of schedules, Week 11 and Week 16. If there's any 2 weeks to play Melvin Gordon, it's those 2 weeks. That's when he goes back and plays the Chargers. Week 11, the first time it's in Denver. Week 16, which is most leagues' fantasy championship game, Melvin Gordon, he's going to want revenge in those games. They didn't want to pay him. He goes back and plays them. He could put on a show in those 2 games. And finally, sorry.
I got an open question for that. Like, let's say somehow through the year you guys acquire Melvin Gordon, not really thinking, having this kind of take where you don't really think he's a great player, and the metrics kind of back that up. But let's say you have Melvin Gordon, you play him in your championship week, he goes against the Chargers, and he just goes off, he wins you a championship. Is that going to change your output for him moving on next season?
It's tough to say, and the only reason I say that is because there's actually a graph that's been floating around Facebook the last day or two about all the free agent running backs that are coming out in 2021, and plus the actual draft is supposed to be just as deep as this year was too. So it really depends on where those running backs land and how and what they decide to do with Lindsay and what that running back situation looks like there. Because Gordon obviously is in Denver for a couple more years. Lindsay's still there. I think he's still on his rookie contract, so he still has this year and next year. So I mean, as long as that situation stays the same, I might swing towards Gordon a little bit more. But then with all the other running backs possibly moving around, Marlon Mack could be one of those names because they just drafted Jonathan Taylor. We could see Ingram be one of those names because they just drafted J.K. Dobbins. We could see Kerryon Johnson be one of those names because they just drafted DeAndre Swift. So, I mean, you're just throwing all these new names into potential new teams, which could make it be where you have 10 RB1s go up to 15 RB1s where you're just pushing other running backs back. So, I mean, that's kind of where I stand. I don't know. I mean, one game where he just explodes and wins me a championship out of 16. It all depends on what he does over the other 15, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've always said when my philosophy for playing fantasy is to look forward, not behind. So I always, as much as I look at metrics, that's why I look at offensive schemes and what's changed. So here's the metrics from 2020. How is this going to change in 2021 based on the offensive line, based around pieces around them, based on, as Jerry said, where other running backs are going. So I think, there's a lot of different factors that go into it. But I mean, I tend to, one game's not going to define a career for me. I'd still hate Melvin Gordon and over the course of his career. But, like I said, I think the situation is at least intriguing to me this year. And if the situation dictates where I think in the future he could be just as productive, then I might change my mind.
All right. Did we answer your question there?
Yeah, I just think it would be an interesting, thing to kind of bring up. Like, what if he wins you, that kind of thing? Like, has there ever been like a player that you just haven't been in on, and he's won you a championship in a big game, and that kind of changes your opinion on him?
I think I can say the opposite a few times. There's players that I've lost a championship to, and I'm like, screw that guy, I don't want him.
Well, would our number 26 player kind of be in that same boat? He didn't necessarily win us a championship, but he did have a 220-yard, 4-touchdown game in the playoffs, and now he's coming in at 26, and we don't like him on any other teams.
Well, it's the same kind of thing with Damian Williams, that he's kind of in our 30s, but we've talked about Edwards-Helaire, he's in the same boat too. All these rookies are coming in, and it's kind of pushing the veterans down. And you have a guy like Damian Williams, who's just been awesome in the playoffs and struggled with injuries last year, then comes back and essentially is the clutch player in the Super Bowl. So, I feel like that factors in a little bit to, how the teams use their players in the postseason, just because that's what matters the most. So when Damian Williams, in the postseason, they're multi-touchdown games. He's highly involved, so that's just why I feel I'm a little bit down on Clyde as well as compared to the community. But that's just, I like to look at that, and in the championship weeks, in the it's not always important to some teams, but mostly in the playoffs, how they're going to use their players is how I like to look at for them the next season, just because they're involved.
Yeah,
Fair
quickly
points.
too, just wrapping up on Melvin Gordon, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the offensive scheme quickly. So they do have a new offensive coordinator there, Pat Shermer, who has a pretty long tenure as an offensive coordinator. He's traveled around. I think he was in Philly, Cleveland, Minnesota. He was with the Giants the past 2 years, but he's actually been pretty pass heavy over the course of his career. So, and he's kind of known for working with QBs. So I think that's a nice fit for Drew Lock in that offense.
All right. And we got one more name to talk about. Apex, it happens to be your turn to kick us off, but it also happens to be from your favorite team. So, Jordan, do you want to take the reins here and let Apex finish it?
Yeah, I can do that, sure. So yeah, we have James Conner at 21 here. And I know we're probably going to have differing opinions on this, but the one thing, and I've heard several people say this before, but the Steelers want to run a bell cow back. I mean, James Conner last season, when he did play, only played 53% of the snaps. I mean, that doesn't exactly scream bell cow to me. I mean, they did change their offensive coordinator. That's why I don't think it's overly relevant to look back too far. I think Randy Fitchner's been there since 2018, I want to say off the top of my head, right around there. So, I mean, I don't really think there's enough data on him to say whether or not he likes a bell cow back. I mean, it's a fair point. Mike Tomlin has said, I want to have a bell cow back, and I mean, you're going to listen to Mike Tomlin. I've said a few times he's the second best head coach in the NFL, and I really do believe that. But, the injury concern definitely is real. We have to bring it up at some point. When I look at the medical records, it said he's number one in injury probability based on his history. So, that's a real concern. But, I do like where he's going in drafts overall. With all that said, I think he provides decent value right now. I would grab him as a flex play. And if he does take the reins on that backfield, I do think that he has an opportunity to be a top 15 guy. It's just there's a lot of ifs for me. For me personally, I don't want him as my RB2. I'll take him as a flex, but there's a lot of ifs there for me. I think Anthony McFarland is very explosive, and I could argue that he has more pure running talent than James Conner, which might seem crazy to say out loud, but I really liked what I saw from Anthony McFarland. I'm not overly concerned about Jalen Samuels, who I think is more of a pass-catching, complementary kind of back, if that. I wasn't overly impressed with him last season. Same with Benny Snell. A lot of people liked him coming out, but if anything, I think Benny Snell would be more of a threat to James Conner than Jalen Samuel. But for me personally, there's just too many ifs, and I'll take him as my flex, but I don't want to take him much above that.
Before you go, Apex, let me just Google real quick on how to mute somebody else. No, I'm just kidding. Let's hear your thoughts on James Conner, and then we'll go from there.
Well, you said it in the negative light, but the truth of the matter is Mike Tomlin wants a bell cow back. All right, so who is his back? It's going to be James Conner. So last year, we're just going to throw it out the window. Ben was gone. You had Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges in there. You got college level quarterbacks that are still, adjusting to the game, to kind of put it nicely. So, throw that out. Throw it out for all the Steelers. Deontay Johnson, proved to have a nice season, but Juju had a down year. James Conner had a down year. And it's just not reflective of what this offense is with Ben Roethlisberger. So with Ben Roethlisberger back, we can kind of get back into this rhythm that we're going to see a number one receiver in Juju. We're going to see a nice compliment in Deontay Johnson. We're going to see involvement from the tight end. And we're going to see a bell cow back, and that's James Conner. If, I do have to acknowledge the injury risk because it's there. He's survived cancer before, so obviously a fighter at heart. And very high determination, but he battled a lot of nagging type of injuries this past 2 seasons. Even when he came in and kind of had the starting role when Bell was supposed to be there, he put in a great season, but just kind of fell off towards the end. So we do have to acknowledge that, which is why I feel like this is a nice ranking. I'm very confident as James Conner as my RB2, but I'm not going to put him up in that top 10 range because of the injury problems. If he's going to be healthy and on the field, he's very much involved. We've seen dating back to Richard Mendenhall, Mike Tomlin has used one back predominantly, and James Conner's in the situation where if he's going to be healthy, he's going to get a really big workload, a workload that could put him in the RB1 range, and we're seeing him going in RB2. So the injury risk definitely has him down at the right spot for us, but he offers a lot of high upside if he were to stay healthy.
Yep, he's. I mean, just a year ago, if you were at the end of the first round, you were taking him and Joe Mixon back to back, just kind of.
I did that. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think I did that a couple of times too, and now we got them separated by, spoiler alert, 15 spots in our consensus rankings. He is. You guys pretty much both hit it right on the head, but he is. When he's healthy, he's as good as pretty much any other back that's in the league. He has battled cancer. He has battled other injuries. His offensive line is still top notch, though. His defense is top 5, top 3 in some people's cases. So I mean, just all those combinations, and if Ben is fully healthy and back too, we could see him as an RB1. The defense is gonna keep points out of the end zone. They're gonna hopefully, I mean, with Juju and Deontay Johnson, they're putting points up on the board. I mean, James Conner is gonna have every opportunity to get you some points in the rushing game. He can catch the ball out of the backfield too. The thing that does scare me even beyond the injuries, because I hate going back to injuries, is that the last 2 drafts they have drafted 2 running backs. They've drafted Benny Snell in 2019, and then they drafted McFarland this year. Middle round guys, I mean, 4th round picks, I think they both were. And none of them are really going to go in there and just kind of take over the job, but they are adding more. They're basically adding guys to take away from James Conner in that backfield. Jalen Samuel is like you mentioned, Doc. He doesn't really scare me. He was a hot waiver wire pickup last year, but he's not going to come in and kind of just take over the backfield, take over the game. I do like James Conner. I think in my personal rankings he was still at 20, but even just talking about him right now, I think I want to move him up a little bit because of all the factors there. The injury factor, I think, is the biggest one here, and it's not fair to the player, but that's the reality of fantasy football. Is you need the best ability is availability, and you need him on the field if you want to win your games. But I do like him. I'd just looking at, and I don't want to go into next week's show right now, but just looking at even the next 3 guys that we have on the list, I would take I would take James Conner over 2 of them. I guess David Johnson is one of them. I kind of just slipped out of my mouth, but I would take James Conner over 2 of them and be totally happy with it. And just with factoring in wide receivers and Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes, you could get James Conner basically at the end of the 2nd, early 3rd round.
Yeah, and if you're into that kind of thing, it is his. He's a free agent next year, James Conner. So if you're a believer, and that makes a difference.
All right, so that does it for this week's episode. We counted down from 30 to 21 for the running backs. Next week will be 20 to 11. I don't know how to count backwards. 20 to 11 will get done next week. And, I believe this is posting not too much longer after we record it. So a lot of the stuff that we said, there's not going to be much changes from what we just talked about. Anything you want to end on there, Jordan?
No, I mean, we got lots of cool stuff going on the Fantasy Mafia page, so make sure you check out all our articles. We're blasting several out every single day, so they're all on our website, thefantasymafia.com. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. We have NFL, MLB, and NBA content going up there. So lots of stuff going on. Just make sure you check it out.
Apex, any last words?
I'm just very in on James Conner, so I hope to target him. I actually did want to bring up the point you said a back of the second. I've seen him go pretty farther down than that. Maybe in the back of the third, early fourth round. So, depending on who you draft against, he could be a nice value. So, go James Conner.
Go James Conner. All right, we'll end it on that. He's we're all rooting for him, except for I'm not rooting for him in Week 14 this year. But that's we're gonna end it on that, and next week we'll do the next set of running backs.